Hello again, college football fans. It is a beautiful October 22nd, Sunday, 2023. And boy, it was a banner day for Alabama yesterday. That was probably the best half of football I've watched my beloved Crimson Tide play. I'm going to think back to maybe 2021, 2020 Georgia victories. Not obviously not the game that we lost in the national championship to them, but the SEC championship of 2021 and then the regular season game we played against them in the COVID year in 2020. That's the best yesterday afternoon I've seen Alabama look since probably those victories, and it was a sight for sore eyes, let me tell you. I mentioned earlier this year in the Ole Miss game that it seemed like a flip was switched in the second half. Well, it was switched emphatically yesterday. As a matter of fact, in my entire Alabama fan career, that may be the best comeback, come from behind victory, certainly the most emphatic come from behind tale of two halves sort of deal that I've ever seen Alabama, are definitely near the top. I have some memories of some great comebacks. There was a comeback at LSU in Baton Rouge in 1998, and there was an onside kick that was recovered and a couple of really, really late touchdowns in a game that we were down a couple of scores with not much time left in the ball game at all. But it was not the same as this. I mean, this was definitely just a team that woke up. It was sleepwalking a little bit, I think, in the first half. At least that's what Nick Saban said in his one of his post-game interviews, was that this was a tired team coming in, and then the momentum of the game woke them up and inspired them to play with maximum effort and focus. And I believe that this is the first half of football where our team has played with maximum effort and focus, except maybe for the Ole Miss game. But, last week, Alabama let me down. A few weeks ago, I mentioned that they were becoming a second half team. And last week, the second half was the problem in the game. But this week, they reaffirmed my inclination that they are certainly a second half team, and they came out roaring so beautifully. Bama, what they looked like in the second half yesterday? They looked like Alabama, and it's the first time that I could say that in quite a while. The O-line had its best day of the season by far, I would say, but mainly because now they had moments where they were holding up well in pass protection against Texas A&M, and they've had moments where they've looked well running the game against Ole Miss and certain other games, but they haven't really had a game where they were just pristine when it comes to the penalties. The pre-snap false start penalties have been a real problem for our O-line this year, and they were beautiful at that yesterday. The best stat of the entire game, really, to me, is one penalty for 5 yards against Alabama, and you see what happens when they pave the road for their running backs, when they don't make mistakes, and when they give time to their quarterback. They did all three of those things beautifully in the second half, and we looked like a dominant college football team, which we haven't been able to say that very much over the last 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons, since the last national championship victory. And I believe that a lot of that is because Jalen Milroe is a young quarterback, and he's not one of these transcendent talents like Tua or Mac Jones. Wasn't really. That was just a transcendent offense altogether. And Bryce Young. And I feel like Alabama has been more adamant and more willing to go through some growing pains with the running game this year, because they just know that they're going to need it at certain points. And, last year and the year before that, I know Nick Saban wants his running game to be good, but I do feel like they were less. They felt like it was less of an imperative, because you could always fall back on Bryce Young. He can bail us out, and most of the time he did. But even Bryce Young wasn't able to do it a couple of times, and I always feel like offenses that can run the ball, you saw it yesterday in that second half. Everything else opens up. The pass game opens up. The running game for Milroe, which probably looked as good as he's looked. Now, I know he's had some really long, impressive-looking, athletic-looking runs in the past, but these were system runs where everybody did everything right, and it looked beautiful. Now, they may not gone for 60 yards or whatever like you saw some games he's played in the past. But if you can do that RPO and the quarterback keeps and get a consistent 10 to 15 yards, that's just worth its weight in gold, folks. And if we can do that consistently now, and I'm not saying that we're going to be able to, but we're coming into an off week, so we can just kind of revel in this win that we had. And you know, when they were doing those RPOs and McClellan looked great, and we're going to talk about him in a moment, when that was all going together well, we looked like a dangerous offense. We looked like an offense that might be able to get into a shootout with Jaden Daniels and Brian Kelly down there, even though I know they're coming to Tuscaloosa. But that I was really worried about that. I was really worried about our ability to be able to do something like that. Now, you know, if they go off and have a great day and score, 40-something points, I'm still skeptical of our ability to be able to hang in that kind of a game. But with our defense and everything, I don't think we have to worry too much about that. But I'm thinking way too far ahead now and not doing what I said I was going to do, which is just revel in this beautiful victory. This was a banner day for Alabama, like I said earlier, and it was just so good. And I know the rest of Alabama's fan base feels the same way. It's so good to see us look like us again, because it's really been a minute, folks. If you're not an Alabama fan, and I know everybody outside of Alabama thinks we're spoiled and crazy and have unrealistic expectations, but those, if you want to call the second half of yesterday unrealistic expectations, you can go ahead, but it happened. We saw it happen, and we've seen it happen a lot in the past, so I don't think it's that unrealistic. We are at that high of a level still. We still recruit at high enough level that we shouldn't be ridiculed for expecting that level of excellence that we saw. And, let's just hope that we don't go a little crazy and expect them to start doing that on a consistent basis. We're going to have to remember that this is still a young team. This is still a first-year offensive coordinator. I don't consider Kevin Steele a first-year defensive coordinator, and I do think that I am going to expect excellent defensive play throughout the remainder of this season, because this is the best defense that we have had in 5 years, hands down now, and I'm ready to say that now, because Tennessee actually played better than I thought they would on offense, especially in the first half, and we'll get into that more of that later. Jase McClellan, bouncing outside, which is kind of what I've wanted him to do. I feel like Jase and Roydell both just kind of run into the scrum. I've blamed their vision. I've blamed everything I can think of. But Jase McClellan is a good running back, and so is Roydell. And I've said that from the beginning. I still don't think either one of them are elite, top-round NFL draft pick talents. But they are both good enough running backs that we can have a good enough running game to where you see what you saw in that second half yesterday. And I'd say, considering the competition, Jase's game yesterday was probably the best game of his career. Now, he's had better or similar numbers in similar type games. The Ole Miss game from last year comes to mind. The Ole Miss game from this year comes to mind. But Arkansas, he had a good game. But considering the level of Tennessee's defense, which they really do have a good upper echelon SEC defense this year, and you haven't been able to say that in 15 or 16 years about Tennessee, I don't believe. And he looked like a quality starting running back for any college football team. Any college football team would be happy to have him. But I do really like him bouncing outside, and that run to open the second half was an announcement of what you were about to see. I was terrified, obviously, after the first half of that ball game yesterday. And when we ripped off that 30-yard run to start off the second half, I can't think of anything better that I would have liked to have seen in that moment. I was happier to see that than if Jalen Milroe had just thrown a 75-yard touchdown to Isaiah Bond. I was so happy to see that big run, because it wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't because Jase broke a tackle. The offensive line blocked the way we remember them blocking, and it was a great thing to see. He could have driven a truck, like they say, through that hole, and it was glorious, and everything that followed after that was glorious. Defense took a bit to settle in, but that That first touchdown that Tennessee had, that was just a magnificent play. An absolute ESPN Sports Center highlight of the day. Magnificent play by Squirrel White, and a good throw by Milton, but the White catch was what was so unbelievable about that. And that was the one touchdown. Other than that drive that they had before halftime, that was more of a legitimate drive. But giving up touchdowns like that, you can't get too upset about that, because great plays are going to be made sometimes. I know that Chris Braswell probably shouldn't have been the only guy covering him, but he did a pretty good job covering him. I mean, he wasn't like 5 yards ahead of him or anything, and it still took an amazing catch to make that happen. But then the defense settled in, and the two stops in the red zone after that were maybe the story of the game. Would we have been able to come back if it's a 28-7 halftime score as opposed to 27? I don't know, but that's what they stopped happening. And, you know, that's another thing that I worry about heading into that LSU game. But as you can see, I'm very, very worried about that game. But we've got plenty of time to talk about that. The second half, defense, they had the killer instinct that we haven't really seen. Well, we saw it against Ole Miss, and we saw it a little bit against Texas A&M, but some penalties and some things like that kind of prevented us from really stepping on their throat the way we wanted to. But we definitely stepped on Tennessee's throat and preventing them from, even when they were driving, and we were up 14 late in the game, so it wasn't like a very high pressure moment in the game where you would expect them to play with their top focus and top intensity. They were playing with top focus and intensity, even with a 14-point lead with 3 minutes left in the ball game, and would not allow them to score, even though they got down in the red zone. And I was very happy to see that. Everything about that second half was just almost everything I could ask for. The only weak spot that I would say would be Kool-Aid McKinstry's punt returning, but I'm not going to get too much into that, because right now we just really need to be happy with what we've seen out of this team in the whole first half of this football season, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And I'm going to conclude all of my bragging and all of my gushing with Jalen Milroe. And with time to throw the ball, he's shown enough this season that he is a dangerous quarterback throwing the ball. Now, I know he's not the best surgical precision guy out there when it comes to the intermediate stuff. He's getting better at that. But the thing about it is, if they can get better at calling those RPOs and he can get better at making the proper reads on those, he doesn't need an intermediate passing game. And we've gone 7-1 without him having much of one anyway. And that's really going to be a key down the stretch, is him running those design runs and making those reads the way he did in the second half against Tennessee. But I just can't be more pleased with the way Jalen has played this year. I felt like he would be fine. I felt like his athleticism would help, but I never thought that he would be as consistently a great deep thrower as he is. And that's maybe, that and the defense is why we're sitting here at 7-1 as a team this year, because of Jalen Milroe's long throwing ability and our defense. And he's gotten really clutch on third downs. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but long third downs where you know pressure's going to be coming, the pressure is the worst on second down, I think. But third down, high pressure situations, he gets a lot more of those than he doesn't, or at least half of them, and that's a great percentage, in my opinion. So he's become clutch. He's dangerous with the deep ball, always has been, and that's remained consistent. And now if he can start running those RPOs, and he also had a good scramble run, which was the only way he used to be able to get good numbers on the ground. But, you know, throw his legs into the mix, and the offensive line starts not making mistakes and paving the road for Jace McClellan more, we are definitely going to be an offense, and with the defense as a complement to it, we're just going to be a dangerous team, and we're getting closer to me being able to talk about college football playoffs and things like that. Now, I'm going to talk about what I got right and what I got wrong in my prediction. I was kind of proud of this prediction, as a matter of fact. The margin of victory was similar. I predicted a 24-13 Alabama victory. We got a 14-point win as opposed to an 11-point win, but that's close enough. The score was a little bit higher, but that was just kind of the way the game settled in. It's really hard to pick scores. Margin of victory to me is easier to pick than the actual score of the game. I would never bet on an over-under if I was betting, but I might bet on some who's going to cover the line or not. And if I had bet on this one, I would have won, because Alabama did cover. Things that I was right about, one of the things was it was pretty close to the win total, as I just said. Wrong about it is a little bit higher scoring. Both teams' running game, I was dead on right about that. I said I would not bet on Tennessee getting more than 150 yards. They wound up with 133. Alabama, I hoped that at our very best we might be able to squeeze out 100 yards. We wound up getting 138 yards, which was above my expectations, but I feel like that was a pretty good prediction for me. And I think that's probably the ultimate reason why Alabama wound up winning by 14, is because Tennessee was not able to run the ball the way that they're used to running it. And I could kind of see that one coming, so I'm proud of myself on that one. Late turnover to put the game out of reach. That's exactly what happened, and I called it. I was kind of thinking, I didn't really say what I thought it was going to be in the prediction, but I was thinking it would be an interception. But I'll take Chris Braswell knocking that ball out of his hand and Jihad Campbell scooping and scoring it any day of the week. That was gorgeous. And as good as I felt as an Alabama fan, probably since the SEC championship game in 2021. Jalen Milroe getting sacked. I was right about that, and I was right about Bama getting to Milton. Bama got to Milton more than I believe any team has gotten to him this year, and Milroe continued to take his lumps, but he overcame it, as I mentioned in the preview video as well. Another thing I was right about was Bama's slow start. That's something that has been a theme throughout the season, and you can kind of see that coming. I really hope that we can reverse that at times going forward in the season, but right now we're just going to be happy with the fact that we were able to overcome a slow start yet again. And we had a slow start defensively and offensively, which I really didn't see the defensive slow start coming. But that spectacular play by Tennessee, you can't really predict those things happening, and we talked about that earlier, and that's just part of what happened in that game. And that catch is probably why the game went 34-20 instead of more like 24-13 like I had predicted. Another thing I was wrong about, Milton was a little bit better, especially in the first half, than I predicted. But the second half, we handled him the way I felt like we should have and could have, and we certainly did. So I think I was more right than wrong about this prediction, and I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit for that. Now, I'm going to talk about the conference and the country a little bit now, before we look ahead to the off week for Alabama. In the SEC, I don't feel like there's been any real change in the dynamics of the West. Alabama, LSU both won. I was predicting both of them to win. I mean, who didn't predict LSU to beat Army? But things are looking in the West the way that they should after Week 8, I would say. Ole Miss, LSU are still in contention. Ole Miss needs us to lose twice. LSU needs Ole Miss to lose one more time. So I would say LSU definitely has more of a realistic shot at getting to Atlanta than Ole Miss. But you can't count out Lane Kiffin. He beating Auburn in Jordan-Hare for Lane Kiffin, I think, was a bigger deal than people are going to give him credit for, because that's the first time Ole Miss, I heard this somewhere on the radio this week, Ole Miss hasn't beaten Auburn 2 years in a row since the 50s. I can't remember exactly what the years were, but that's something. You do something that a team hasn't done in 70 years, that's a big deal. So Lane Kiffin is having perhaps his best year at Ole Miss in his tenure there. Now, I do worry about them down the stretch because, like I mentioned in some earlier video, Ole Miss has a tendency to wilt towards the end of the season, but that remains to be seen. Tennessee is out of it in the East, in my opinion. I guess mathematically they're probably not, but come on, way too much chaos would have to ensue in order for Tennessee to get to Atlanta, and one of those things would be them beating Georgia, and I wouldn't bet on that right now. Missouri continues to impress, and I'm telling you what now, I have not wanted to pump the gas on them too much this year and get too excited about that game that they have with Georgia coming up. But that's going to be exciting. That's going to be exciting because they have an off week coming up, and it's looking like they're going to be. I don't know when that game is. It may be after the off week, but even if it's not, I would be surprised if Missouri has more than one loss going into that one. So Georgia without Brock Bowers is still a mystery. That's something to look forward to in the SEC West and to keep a close eye on. Now around the country, more of the dominoes were falling. You know, we mentioned that a couple weeks ago. Still a lot of undefeated teams for this point in the season, but they are starting to fall. We knew we were going to lose one because of the Ohio State-Penn State game. That game happened pretty much as I think most people expected it to. North Carolina, that was a shocker. We actually mentioned Virginia in the video last week, I believe, because they played Tennessee, and I said they weren't that great of a team. Well, I still don't think they're that great of a team, but they pulled a great upset over North Carolina. Best upset in the history of their program, from what I understand. They've never beaten a top 10 team on the road before, so kudos to Virginia for pulling that one off, and all of us guys with one-loss teams tip our hat to you for that. Near misses. Oklahoma, that's something else I was right about. I said I was not going to predict that it was going to be an upset, but I said it felt like it would be more interesting. Buddy, it was definitely interesting. Gus Malzahn was a 2-point conversion away from really setting some chaos off yesterday. And Washington, didn't see that one coming. That was out of total left field. I mean, you know, you always kind of worry a little bit about a team that's highly ranked, that just got their biggest win of the season, that got so much press and so much attention from everyone around the country. Those are always trap games, but Arizona, you know, they just didn't seem. But that, you know, that's college football, and that's why I don't like to try to predict upsets, because they're unpredictable. The one I predicted was the most predictable upset that would have happened, and what did happen? I think a one-win Virginia team goes into an undefeated North Carolina against a legendary coach like Mack Brown, pulls off the victory. So that's college football for you. And we're going to see more of that before it's over with. And like I said, most of these dominoes are going to fall. It just kind of happens that way every year. Moving on to my top 4. I've really enjoyed doing this. Last time I did these videos, I did SEC power rankings and all that kind of stuff, and that got kind of tedious, to be honest, and I didn't enjoy it, but I really enjoyed doing these top 4s because it doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's pretty easy. Number 1, I've had FSU in every one of these that I've done, and I'm keeping them there because I just believe they are flying under the radar, and I don't really understand why. They've looked wonderful. Sure, they've had a couple of close games. I mean, that game last night was sort of close with Duke, I suppose, and they're not going to get as much credit as they should because their Duke starting quarterback went out late in that game. But I still think that was an impressive victory considering everything that they have on the line. They've got a lot of pressure on their shoulders, and that's a newfound pressure for FSU. I know Florida State is a traditional powerhouse, or at least has been since the 80s when Bobby Bowden rose them up into national prominence. But they haven't been in that situation since the Jameis Winston days, and that's been a long time ago. So the fact that they're handling this kind of pressure, and that was an impressive win. I think that was almost as impressive a win as Ohio State got against Penn State. And that's why I have Ohio State at number 2, because I wasn't quite as impressed with the Penn State win as much as everyone else was. Well, you know, actually, I think most of the country kind of expected that game to go the way that it did. But I just don't see any reason to drop Florida State. And Ohio State is deserving of number 2. And I would definitely listen to an argument about them being number 1 at this point. Number 3, I have Georgia, and they are still sort of a benefit of the doubt kind of situation, especially now with Brock Bowers injured. We're going to have to wait and see how they look without him. I don't think they're going to look that much worse, but I can't imagine that they're going to look as good. So that remains to be seen. The outdoor cocktail party next week should tell us a lot about what's going on between the hedges. Number 4, I've got Michigan. I've got Michigan begrudgingly because I would gladly put Oklahoma or Washington in that number 4 spot, but both of them kind of laid some turds over there in Seattle and Norman, respectively. So Michigan, I'm going to have to put them there. And Michigan just has a way, historically and this season, just always, of laying a sort of a voodoo, kind of black magic, unholy spell on the media. Now, I know that a lot of the media went to Michigan. I know at least Rich Eisen did. Used to be a Sports Center guy. Now he works for, I don't even know who he works for now. But he does a podcast that I think is pretty entertaining. But Michigan just, I think historically, they are always mentioned as one of the top programs in history. I understand why, because they have the most victories of everybody, but that is sort of a misleading stat. I know it sounds weird because winning ball games is the whole point. But they've just played a lot of winnable ball games in their history. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the Big Ten. The Big Ten has always been top heavy. They've always been Michigan and Ohio State and then everybody else who manages, Purdue will have a good spell here and there. Michigan State has a good spell every now and again. Wisconsin as well. But it's definitely few and far between, and I feel like they don't play competitive on a national level, the lower part of the Big Ten, as much as like the SEC does, as much as maybe past versions of the Big 12 and the Pac-10, Pac-12 have. ACC definitely has always sort of been. But then you have to remember that there was the Big East before, too. And so the Big East, the ACC currently is sort of a mixture of the old Big East and the old ACC. So it's kind of hard to make those comparisons. But just Michigan, if you want to make a historical argument because they've got the most victories, fine. But just look at their national championship. Let's look at their Big Ten championships. Look at things that their legends like Bo Schembechler have done. It just doesn't impress me all that much. And I don't think they belong in the same class as teams like Alabama and Notre Dame, certainly, or Oklahoma or USC or Nebraska, or maybe even the Miamis and the Florida States of the world probably have enough recent success that they have outshined Michigan in an overall historical level. But I know most people don't pay attention to the history of this stuff as much as I do and revere it as much as I do. But I think it's important. If we don't have the history to look back on, then why are we even doing this? If I'm just supposed to enjoy what happened Saturday or what happened in 2023 and forget about all that other stuff, then I don't even understand why we're doing this. But that's enough said about that. But Michigan, this season, I just heard Paul Feinbaum say and Matt Berry say that Matt Berry says he thinks they're the number one team in the country. Paul Feinbaum said he could understand that argument, and he also said that they have definitely been the most impressive team. How could they have been the most impressive team with the schedule that they have played? I think I may make a video by itself about the overrated nature of Michigan, but we'll have to wait for that one. Now I'm going to talk about this off week that's coming up. First, I want to reflect on what a fun season this has been. The last couple of seasons with Bryce Young at quarterback, the pressure to win national championships has been there, whether it was warranted or not. So that always takes a little bit of the fun out of the seasons, especially when you lose 2 games before the end of the season like we did last year. So all those close games that we played in 2021 and last year and those losses that we had just weren't enjoyable all that much if you were an Alabama fan. But this year has been enjoyable because I don't think that many realistic Alabama fans expected us to be the juggernaut that we've been in the past this season, and especially after the Texas loss, our expectations got tempered down, and then we had that just fascinating game against South Florida, which inspired me to start making these videos again because I thought it was so fascinating, the reaction to that game after it happened. And I'm going to pat myself on the back again by saying that, just because what had happened at Texas and South Florida had happened did not mean that all was lost for Alabama and that we couldn't have a very entertaining, fun, productive season moving forward. And I think we've already proven that no matter what happens the rest of the way. This Tennessee game that we won yesterday, it feels like a better win than any win we had last season because of the stakes that are involved. Now, Ole Miss, Auburn, and Kansas State were all good wins down the stretch last year. But our hopes were off the table by that point, and we were just trying to not be embarrassed. Those were the stakes, really. Don't get embarrassed. And we did that, but that's really not high enough. That's not enough skin in the game for at least this Alabama fan to really be able to enjoy those victories. And we just barely beat Ole Miss in their place. And we didn't beat Auburn or Kansas State as much as we would have liked to have beat them, even though we did beat them by 3 scores. I think everybody was wanting some big-time wipeouts in those games. But, like I said, they were good wins. But nothing like what this win yesterday felt, with the revenge factor on the line and the fact that everything is on the line and we have no margin for error. So those are pretty high stakes. And things got very, very interesting after the first half. And to see us just roar back and shut Tennessee down the way we did defensively and play the best offensive half we've played all year by a long shot felt really good. And I want to reflect on that going into this offseason because we've still got a lot of business to take care of. I made it well known how scared I am about LSU, and right now I'm just going to enjoy the remnants of the cigar smoke and enjoy the fact that we are a relatively healthy football team going into this off week. As far as I know, the only injury right now that we have to deal with is Terrion Arnold, and Saban made that sound like it was a pretty mild concussion and like he should be cleared for practicing before the week is out. And that's great news because we're going to need all hands on deck a couple weeks from now. And I'm excited to see if this team can continue to progress and can blossom into what we all want at Alabama, which is a college football playoff team and ultimately a national champion. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot of work left on the table. And I've really enjoyed the first part of the season, and I hope that I can enjoy the second half and not let high expectations spoil that. I'm still keeping my expectations where I feel like they should be, which is win the West, beat Auburn, and I hope you'll join me with realistic expectations as well. Thanks for watching.